Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. In days of inclement weather, the Delta terminal at LaGuardia can quickly feel like a bus station in Guatemala. People sleeping on the floor, black market dealings in the corner, feral animals. On one particularly blustery day in February of this year, I found myself in that terminal trying to get to Cleveland. You might not realize how many flights there are each day between New York and Cleveland, but what that means on days like this is that there are a bunch of Cleveland-bound flights getting canceled and a whole mess of people trying to get there. I finally arrived in the rock and roll city around 9 p.m. and immediately started searching the airport for the young Jacob Collier, who I had met in London a couple of months earlier for an episode of this podcast. We finally connected, got in our car, and were delivered to a hotel, to a restaurant, to a table, to be seated among the record producer Tommy LiPuma, bassist Christian McBride, and keyboard player Larry Goldings. And for good measure, Charles Barkley was sitting at the bar, but that's a completely different story. The occasion was a record project for the jazz trumpeter Dominic Farinacci. Both Dominic and the album's producer Tommy LiPuma are originally from Cleveland, and the record is a kind of homecoming for both of them. Although they're from different generations, they're both coming back to Cleveland to work on this. Rather than doing it in LA or New York where these kinds of things typically go down, it was happening on the campus of the Tri-C Community College. The college's recording studio happens to be housed within the Tommy LiPuma Center for Creative Arts, named in honor of the venerable producer. Tommy is legendary. He started out as a barber in Cleveland who played gigs at night as a saxophone player. He was desperate to get out of town, and lucky for him he got connected in the record business because he cut hair for radio DJs and record men. He went on to become one of the most successful and highly regarded record producers of his time. His productions have earned him 35 albums certified gold or platinum, 35 Grammy nominations, and 5 Grammy wins. He's worked with countless musicians and top artists, including Barbra Streisand, Miles Davis, George Benson, Al Jarreau, Natalie Cole, Dave Mason, Michael Franks, Diana Krall, Sir Paul McCartney, and Dr. John. The idea was to bring in some of the top players and technical people from New York and LA to record within the school environment and let the students at the college witness it. It's not exactly an educational project because the end result is something that will exist commercially, but it's not a typical jazz record project either. In fact, it might point to a possible future for making jazz records in what could be described as an inhospitable record business environment today. And not surprisingly, the record is gorgeous, sophisticated, and hip. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but consider yourself warned. It's a great thing. In any case, the hang was on. Tommy and Dom pulled together a fantastic collection of players for the record, and while they were in town, they all conducted a series of master classes and panel discussions. Today's episode is one of those panel discussions. Originally titled Recording in the Modern Age, It's All About Relationships, it's really a loose, freewheeling conversation about what it's like to work with Tommy LiPuma, how he works, who he works with, and the importance of those relationships. I learned quite a bit watching the guys work that week, and also seeing how they treated me. In fact, I came to moderate this panel because I ran into Tommy in the elevator on the way to breakfast that morning, about an hour before the panel was going to happen, and he said to me, "Man, I want you to do this thing today. Everybody trusts you and has a relationship with you already." That was all he said. Surrounding him on the panel are the legendary recording engineer Al Schmitt, drummer Steve Gadd, keyboardist Larry Goldings, guitarist Dean Parks, and the aforementioned boy wonder Jacob Collier. If you're new to the podcast, you can hear all of the episodes, leave reviews, and subscribe at third-story.com. You can find me on Twitter at Leo Sidran or on Facebook at The Third Story with Leo Sidran. And finally, speaking of inhospitable record business environments, my new solo record, Mucho Leo, is out now on Rope-A-Dope Records. Although I made it in a kind of musical solitary confinement, the music was deeply influenced by many of the people featured in this conversation. Special thanks to the Tri-C Community College for granting permission to use this material, and to Tommy LiPuma for the invitation to make my mistakes in public. What follows is exactly what happened when we took the stage.
I feel like a kid in a candy store. You should all too. This is like a really unusual opportunity to listen to these guys. The title of this panel is Recording in the Modern Age. It's all about relationships. And this panel is an incredible example of what that means. Sitting in the middle of this panel, Tommy and Al, is a long-term, Tommy, I think you said 40-year relationship. So maybe we could just start by talking about how you two met and what the world was like in the recording industry, in the record business, when you met, how you two came to know each other.
I went out to L.A. and I was a local promotion man in Cleveland at a record distributor. I was a barber before that and a musician. And I worked, casuals. I worked gigs, I worked clubs and around town and so forth. And I hated it. I was just absolutely, in fact, I've got a friend here, Don Modica, who I grew up with. He could tell you how much I hated the barber business because he was a barber too. So I got a job. As it turns out, one of my customers, I was very fortunate. My barber shop was right in the middle of Playhouse Square. And all of the radio stations were in that area. So all the disc jockeys came in for haircuts. Next thing you know, they started bringing in guys from record distributors. And to make a long story short, one of these guys gave me a job, packing records in the back room of a record distributor. And I did that for about 5 or 6 months, and then I got into record promotion. And I loved that. Did great. Turns out somebody hired me in L.A. at a record company called Liberty Records. So I took that gig, and I did that for about a year in L.A., and then they asked me if I wanted to go to New York as a promotion man. And I said, well, yeah, if I can get into publishing, because they had a publishing company, and I started thinking that maybe promotion was sort of a one-way street, and you can get burned out and everything, and I was thinking of trying something else. So I kind of liked publishing and songs and all that kind of stuff. So I got into that. I became a song plugger. Now, a song plugger was, you'd go around to the A&R men at record companies and basically sell your wares. You'd get new songs from songwriters that you're working with. Like at the time, I was working with Randy Newman. There was another girl by the name of Jackie DeShannon. And it was kind of difficult to get in at times to see these A&R people, particularly the guys at Capitol, like Lee Gillette and these guys. I mean, they didn't want to, they didn't want to deal with anybody except people that they knew. But I remember I looked up, and at RCA there were several staff A&R guys, and one guy was Al Schmitt. Al was an A&R man at RCA. He recorded Sam Cooke, Eddie Fisher. In those days, the genres would cross. If you were an A&R man, A&R, by the way, for you who don't know what that is, it's artist and repertoire. That's what the A&R stood for. So I got this appointment with Al. Al gave me an appointment. We got together, and we became fast friends. We were just buddies, and hung out. And it was a great time to be in L.A. It was really the birth. I was telling somebody the other day that when I got in the record business, it was right at the beginning of where Tin Pan Alley was still significant, because you had places in New York like 1650 building and the Brill building, and all of the publishers and all of the producers, and everybody would be in these buildings. And basically, I just caught the tail end of that. But, we stayed friends, and then 65, 66, things really started radically changing in the business. The Beatles came in. Instead of it being sort of like it used to be where songwriters wrote songs, artists sang the songs. Then it started becoming that songwriters not only wrote the songs, but they performed the songs. Things were changing. And we were sort of right in the midst of when all of this was happening. Next thing you know, Al was producing the Jefferson Airplane. And by that time, started producing. The first thing I produced an OJ's record. This was before they had the hit Money. But we just stayed close to each other. Al started a record company with a friend of his called Steve Douglas. Steve Douglas was famous for the yakety sax on all of the, what records, what were some of the records?
Wayne Eddy.
Yeah,
a lot of the stuff that Phil Spector, he was Phil Spector's guy.
Now, you have to understand also that prior to Al being an A&R person, he was a great engineer, and he engineered all of the Henry Mancini things, Peter Gunn, Hatari. He did all of Hank's things. He was the engineer for, and he also engineered a lot of great jazz records of those days. I mean, you should just some of the records that
God, some of the great jazz records.
I mean, from Ben Webster to Duke Ellington to
Duke Ellington, Jerry Mulligan, Chet Baker, the Street Swingers with Jim Hall and Bobby Brookmeyer.
So what ended up happening was when he got into producing, and I got into producing, and we still, as I said, we were buddies and we hung out and everything. And there was a moment where I was doing this album with a guy by the name of Dave Mason that was part of Traffic, the group Traffic. And Dave wrote Feeling All Right and Hole in My Shoe and some great stuff. So I did this album with Dave for a record company that a friend of mine and myself started called Blue Thumb Records. And I was doing the record with this engineer friend of ours, Bruce Botnick, who ended up doing the Doors and a lot of things. And it turns out the project I was doing with Dave Mason took longer than I thought it was going to take, and Bruce had to go on because he was starting to work with the Doors. He was actually already working with the Doors as a mixer, but he was going to become their producer, and he had to leave. And I was like left in the lurch with this album I had just finished, but I hadn't mixed yet. And I was going, oh man, who am I going to get to mix this thing? And we had a mutual friend of ours by the name of Joe Wizard, who was also a great producer, produced Boss Skaggs and Earth, Wind and Fire and a lot of people. And he happened to say to me, he said, I asked Al to do something for me. I guess you had done something.
The first Earth, Wind and Fire.
Yeah, he said, I asked Al to do something for me. He said, man, you ought to think about Al. I said, Al, of course, man, So I called him and I said, Al, look, man, I'm really in a jam here. I need somebody to mix this album for me. And he said, Tommy, he said, I haven't mixed an album in 12, 13 years. And I think what I said to him was, well, I said, it's like riding a bike, man. Like you'll never forget. So he came in, and of course, the album turned out great. Everything. It just turned out great. And I think it was sort of like a turning point for Al, and sort of had the sense that this is something that he really loved to do. And of course, he started getting calls. And then, of course, from that point on, I think with the exception of a few projects, he's done everything he's recorded everything that I've done since 1973.
It changed my life when we did that Dave Mason record, because I forgot how much I really enjoyed mixing and engineering. And when I was a producer at RCA, because of the union rules, when I was an engineer and went into production, you couldn't touch the board anymore. If you did, you got called up on a union carpet and whatever So I just didn't do anything. It wasn't 12 or 13 years, it was about 8 years I hadn't done anything. So when he called me and asked me to do it, I said, gee, Tommy, I said, I'm not sure I can do it anymore, but we made an agreement that if I didn't feel I was doing a good job, I could back out of it, and if he felt I wasn't doing a good job, he would gently tell me to screw off, So, but we were such close friends that, it just worked. And when I got into mixing it, I realized this is why I got into the business, is doing this. I didn't get in to be a producer, I got in to be an engineer. And it just changed my life. So, thanks for that. And we're still good friends after all these years. God, It's amazing.
You were friends first.
Yeah, true.
And then you got in the studio together. Yeah. One of the things that sort of rings out in that story is that when you were trying to figure out who to get to mix the record, you didn't turn to your record collection and listen to necessarily who was mixing stuff. You started to talk to people and ask your friends and sort of get suggestions.
Well, there were a couple of, it wasn't that there wasn't anybody there. I think Bones Howe was still mixing. But, it's such a personal thing And having a relationship, well, this is what it's all about,
Yeah.
everybody. Having a relationship with someone is so much more important than just, you know, this guy mixes. And, you know, there's got to be some sort of a camaraderie
Absolutely.
between you, you know? To give you an idea, there was a guy at the time, his name was John Haney, I think. John Haney? No, so, and everybody was saying, well, man, you ought to use John Haney. Well, he was a great engineer, but John was one of these guys where, like, you know, it's like you would do something, and this magic happens, you know, and this is what it's all about, magic. It's like suddenly you work on it, you know, you do your pre-production, you do everything trying to get things together, but then that moment when you get in the room and everybody sort of figures out what they're going to do, and there's that moment when, hey, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. And when you get musicians of this caliber in a room, you don't take 5, 6, 8 takes, man. I mean, you know, within a few takes, you either have it or you don't, you know, or you change the manner in which you're doing it because something's wrong. So it doesn't, once you've got that groove, you know what it is that, you know, what it's going to be. It's just a matter of one or two takes. So I forgot which way I was going. Oh, so John Haney, so they're saying, oh, you should use John Haney. Well, I remembered I used John Haney once, and you get engineers like this. We did this take, and it was just great. And I said, oh, man, that's it? So John goes, oh, wait, no, look. I need one more. Give me one more. I said, give you one more. It's too late, man. If, you know, you either got it, you're either ready or you weren't ready, you know? Okay, we could do one more, and maybe we would get another one. But, you know, you can't do that. You can't say, it's not about the engineer. It's about what you're doing in the room. It's about the artist you're working with, the guys you're working with. It ain't about the engineer. With Al, I know within 10 minutes or 15 minutes at the most, I don't even have to think. I don't have to think about it with Al. It's like I worry about the music. That's all I think about.
I noticed yesterday in the session, I don't think anybody said the word rolling one time all day, and I
Right.
think it's because you just know that it's happening. You don't have to ask, are we rolling?
Well, there was a time.
Brian Montgomery, too. Boy, he's amazing and right on it, you know.
Where is Brian?
He's in there somewhere, yeah.
Brian's been working with us Brian, how long has it been? 10 years? Over 10 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, they call them second engineers.
No.
In Brian's case, he's no second.
No.
He's just fantastic, and we know everything is going to be right there, and it's ready to go.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk to some of the other cats on the panel as well.
No, it's Tommy and I.
Okay. No, I mean, I think we're all delighted if that is the case, but we have such an opportunity here. Steve, I wonder if you could talk about the first time you worked with Tommy.
I think was it Stuff or
Oh, stuff.
Oh, God.
Oh, God.
We can't talk about that. No. We can talk about the second one.
Maybe you did something with Benson. Maybe Benson was the first thing. There was an album we did.
I mean,
at Atlantic.
one of the ones that I remember was like the Ben Sidran one.
Oh, right. Oh, it's Cat in the Hat.
Oh, yeah.
And Mike Maneri was on it, Abe Laborio. We just had a ball. And I remember Tommy, after we'd get these great takes, and Tommy would stand up in the control room. This was when he was still in the control room. He would stand up and press the talk back and just go, and not say anything. And I mean, but we had a ball, you know. We just right off the bat, you know, we had the same kind of, you know, we all like to laugh, and he just creates this atmosphere that makes everyone feel safe, allows you to, trust your creativity, and he just brings out the best in us. And on all the other things we've done. I mean, we did Benson and
Benson, Randy Crawford, one of the great Randy Crawford Joe Sample albums,
Right.
Feeling Good. That was just an amazing album.
He's the type of guy, if you know, whenever he calls, it's like I would try to rearrange whatever I was doing to be with Tommy and Al. It's a great musical situation.
Thank you.
Steve, you mentioned something worth talking about, and it's pretty unusual. Tommy, you like to sit in the room with the cats when they're recording.
Well, the reason I do that is twofold, at least. One, there was something about the talkback and the glass that I would freeze when I just couldn't, because everything would go silent. You know, you'd say, well, what do you think? You know, you'd hit the button and everything would go silent. And it's, You know, I just couldn't convey what I wanted to convey through the glass. And I don't know what it was. We were working on something, and I wanted to be closer to the musicians to explain what it was that I was talking about. So I asked the second, do me a favor, bring a chair and some earphones out into the room so I could sit in the room, and you know, and the music stand so I could have the music in front of me. And so I explained whatever I was going to explain, and then I started realizing, because then we just took a take, and I said, well, man, I'm so much more comfortable in here because I could react immediately when something happens. I'm just part of the room, and I feel so much, it's so much easier for me to talk without having that glass between me. And it just became something that I do. I just feel more, even if there's just one person in the room overdubbing something, like if we're putting something on a track that we've already done, I sit in the room. There's another reason too. There's a lot of shit that goes on inside the studio. You know, like phones ringing, people talking, you know, it's like, and these are all distractions. And I don't want any distractions. I mean, all I want to do is, I just want my earphones on. I want to hear the music. You know, I'll never forget, one of the first sessions I did was with this great guitar player, Tommy Tedesco. And it was actually the first thing that I produced was with Tommy. And so I hired like Red Callender, this great bass player, man. I had all these great musicians that I had grown up listening to. And we got on the date, and I was so nervous. This is my first date. You know, I had all these heroes of mine in the room. I think Bud Shank was on. Oh, Johnny Gras, because we did some things with a French horn. And I you know, so they were playing, and guys were making mistakes, and clams are going, you know, all over the place. And I was so nervous I didn't hear anything. So Bones Howe, who was this, you know, great engineer who did a lot of stuff, Sinatra and so forth. So at one point, he hits the talkback and he says to the guys, all right, hey guys, we're on the honor system today. Meaning, you know, you're gonna have to look out for your own mistakes because he ain't listening, he can't hear them. And I said, oh shit, I gotta pay attention, man. I have to, like, you know, really just zero in on what's going on in the room and forget about everything else, you know? That's another reason why I don't like clocks in the room. I don't want anything in the room. And one of the reasons why I like hiring guys for the day is I don't want any sort of, you know, like usually they used to have like 3-hour sessions. So, you know, and you'd have a union guy come in and, you know, they'd be looking at the watch, and if you were 2 minutes over, and it was all this bullshit, you know. This way, I hire the musicians for the day, and you know, let's say I say, okay, let's get there at noon. Well, maybe noon becomes 12:30, 1, whatever it is. I don't worry about the time. I know that sometime between the time that I call them and the time that we finish, which is usually 7 or 8, we're going to get some stuff. Yeah. And we take a lunch break, and you know, we joke around for a while. But it's not like we're there for a 1-hour session or we're there for 2 hours. You know, nobody's looking at clocks.
This is out of personal curiosity. Is there any technique or clue that you have when it's time to call lunch? Lunch seems like a really crucial thing in the day. You know, when to take a break, when you read the room and you feel the energy.
You know, I usually try to do it sometime in the middle of the afternoon, 2:30, 3 o'clock. If we can get 2 under our belt before lunch, it's great. Now, that doesn't always happen, but I had a great date. I was doing something with Horace Silver. Sweet guy, just a wonderful cat. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of people know who Horace Silver is. He's just one of the great composers, keyboard players. But he was a very frugal guy. I mean, so when we did these sessions, he would stay at a hotel where there'd be a room, there'd be 2 rooms with a bathroom in between, man. He would share a bathroom. So we got to the point where we were going over the budget. So he's looked at the budget, he said, what's this $300 for lunch? And I said, oh, well, that's, for the cats, for lunch. But he said, well, man, can't they pay for their own lunch? I said, well, Horace, first of all, if you want to go around like, with a changer, man, and say, well, you owe me $1.80 and you owe me fine. I said, look, man, I said, I'll take care of lunch. Don't worry about it. But that's basically the lunch story.
Yeah. With a changer.
Yeah. Let's see, you owe me $1.80. Okay, here's 20 cents.
I wonder if Dean and Larry could just share their first experiences working with Tommy and Al.
Tommy, maybe the first time you maybe called me. This, by the way, this record with Dominic, I think, is the first full record I've done with you from start.
Well, you did some great stuff on the Leon Russell album.
Right, but that was still in a sort of after the fact, but just to be part of the
process,
pre-production in a way, and talking about arrangements and writing arrangements. So this is the first time I've done something with Tommy from start to finish, which has been fantastic. But maybe the first time we tried to work together was on a Stanley Turrentine record that it's a complicated story, but it got nixed, and it was very sad for me and for all of us that it just actually ended up not materializing. Got close. I actually went to Stanley's house. And
I get this panic call from Larry, man. He's saying, hey, man, I don't know what's going on, but there's some weird shit happening here, and maybe you better get on the phone with him. So I get on the phone, and it turns out that he's, first of all, I think what was really happening there was that he had done all those. I wanted him to do an organ record because he just played. I just thought some funky organ trio thing, and Larry is one of the great organ players, man. So I thought this would be a good idea. Well, it turns out I think that Stanley thought, well, man, I already did the organ. He was married to Shirley Scott. He did all those records with Shirley Scott. He said, man, I don't want to find what to do an organ record. I said, well, Stanley, look, man, just trust me here, man. I think this really makes sense. And then I had a bass player that I wanted him to use. I don't know if it was could have been Christian, yeah. So Christian McBride. And so I get on the phone. I said, Stanley, what's the problem? He said, oh man, he said, I don't know about this organ record. Man, I want to use my own bass player. And then I hear his wife in the background going, you tell him you want to use your own bass player. And I'm going. So I got Larry back on the phone. I said, look, Larry, I'm sorry, man. Just, take care of everything, man. Don't worry about it. Back and just split. And I just got back on the phone with Stanley. I said, hey, Stanley, this is going to work out. So it turns out about 2 or 3 days later, a mutual friend of ours he was talking to, and he said, hey, I thought you were doing this record. He said, no, man, I got fired.
Well, anyway, that doesn't really count, except for the fact that if it was the first time that anybody asked me to sort of be involved at that level before getting into the studio, going to, as Tommy said, why don't you, I was living on the East Coast at, that time, he said, why don't you take we'll get you on a train to D.C. and you go to Stanley Turrentine's house and hang out with him and feel it out and see what kind of material you want to do. And that alone, I'm glad I had that you facilitated that. But I think, the first time I worked with Tommy in the studio might have been for an Al Jarreau record doing,
oh, right.
And it wasn't a full record, but But Al was there, and we
Right.
were doing live takes with Peter Erskine, Al Jarreau. It was just great. Well, you must have been engineering on that. But a lot of stuff that I've done with these guys have been not necessarily complete projects, largely because I also that I play organ. I get called after the basic tracks have been recorded, and they start to think about what else they need, and so I come in and overdub after the fact. It actually took quite a while for me to actually end up getting to work with Al. It was because also I didn't move to Los Angeles till 2001, so I had been on the recording scenes somewhat in New York, but a lot of those were purely jazz dates. It wasn't until I got to LA that I really started doing more, just such a wide range of things. And let me tell you, when you get when you get recorded really, really well by somebody, and I did have that opportunity in New York with people like James Farber, and people that just make you sound really good. Not to mention few, if no, I mean, when he's working in his own environment, which is Capitol Records, they just know it's just smooth. All you need to do is think about the music. But we've all experienced the whole gamut from total chaos, where you have all these obstacles in the way of thinking about the music. That's when it gets really challenging. That's when you really have to trust your instincts, and you're not hearing yourself right. I've played in every kind of studio that you can imagine, with every quality of engineer. But when you get someone like Al and Tommy, all you need to do is show up and think about playing, And you come back into the room, and it's such a compliment to hear that you've been taken care of sonically in that way. And it took me years to even become conscious of microphones. Why does this sound so good, and what do they know about timbre and instrument combinations and rooms? And I was completely unaware of that stuff for years, until I found myself on recordings you go into the room and it already sounded mixed. That's the thing. With someone like Al, you come in, you hear the first take, and it's so it's already mixed? It sounds so good just going down.
There's a certain transparency that Al gets that I have not heard anyone else gets. And basically what I'm talking about with transparency is, and I was mentioning this to Leo yesterday, we were sitting in front of the speakers listening to a playback, and I said, Leo, you notice how you hear the drums are right there. You can hear the drums, but it's not in the way of anything else that's happening. It's not in the way of what the piano's doing. It's not in the way of what the guitar's doing. You can hear all of the instruments without, some way or other, it's a combination, I think, of mic placement, the mics that he uses, and just his expertise, There's no other way for me. Look, I've been working with him over 50 years, and I still haven't figured out what it is. All I know is that everything just sounds open. You have this sense of air around the music. A lot of guys are like compression freaks. They use a lot of compression because it brings everything up into your face. Al is very, very subtle when it comes to compression.
One thing that you mentioned that I think is also so interesting is the level of pre-production that you experienced, even on the Turntine record that didn't get made, that you were sent to go talk to him before you went in the studio, that, Tommy, you spend a lot of time thinking ahead before you walk into the studio.
It's all in pre-production. I'm telling you, man. If you do your pre-production, you're we could, when we do these Diana Krall records, any of these records, maybe we'll get 40 songs. We'll pull together between us. We'll get 40 songs, sometimes 50 songs, and then we'll work on those. We'll figure out, maybe we'll cut that down to 15, and then we'll go in with 15 tunes. And maybe we'll only get to 13 of them, or whatever. But we'll have that set. And with all of those, we have a sense, Larry and Dominic and I got together in L.A. for a day, just went through things, basically just gave Larry a sense as to what we were thinking about doing. And so when we came in, there was a basic idea. Now it changes radically from there, you know. I mean, when you're working with musicians of this caliber, every take changes. I mean, if you keep playing it, it's going to keep changing, you know, because I don't think these guys want to play anything twice. You know, it's like they just original, they want to do it. And if you ask them an hour later, you remember that thing you played? What thing? What are you talking about? You know, they don't necessarily remember. It's the moment. Now, it's interesting, at one point, you have to ask Jacob, because now Jacob comes from a completely other world, in a sense, you know, what it is that he does and how he does it. And it's basically the future, you know?
Well, one thing that is rooted in the tradition is the relationship that's just forming between you and Jacob, because as a matter of fact, so far on the panel, these are old relationships. Mm-hmm. But you guys actually just met face-to-face this week, despite the fact that you've had a kind of a Skype relationship already.
You introduced me to Jacob the first time. You emailed me, you said, you got to check this kid out. He's on YouTube. Look up Jacob Collier. I looked it up, and he had done this thing called Pure Imagination from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And it was just like nothing I had ever heard before. How many people are familiar with Jacob's work on YouTube? I mean, it's brilliant. So I was just so blown away, and I don't know, Jacob, I don't remember, I think I kept emailing you through your link or something. I don't know how it was, man. But you ended up calling me back. Yeah. And then we started this Skype relationship. Yeah. And you know, calling and talking, and he'd ask me questions about the business and so forth. And, you know, I tried to give him some advice and whatnot. And basically, you know, that's what it's been. It's been more that kind of relationship.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to have someone like Tommy on the line, you know, just sort of say, hey, Tommy, you know, what do you think about this guy? You know, he seems like this kind of vibe. You know, what do you think about someone like him approaching me? Or what do you think about the tempo for this tune? Or, you know, anything like this. You know, to have Tommy on the other end of the rather long line of the whole of the world, it's really cool. I mean, he's one of the most kind of spirited, experienced, just, you know, and energetic, and just, you know, he's so enthusiastic about music in general. I find that really infectious. I mean, you can tell when someone loves music, and Tommy loves music, man. He really loves it. So, yeah, and so do I. So, you know, even if it's just me, you know, hipping you to some stuff, and then you hipping me to some stuff, and that's just kind of nice to hang out like that. But I mean, this is the first time we've kind of met in person.
That's right.
About 24 hours ago or something, we finally made it, which is cool. But, you know, it's great because Tommy's got all these years of experience behind him, and these kind of extraordinary people, you know, with whom he has worked, and you know, just to kind of spend a bit of time with him there is pretty inspiring. It really is. It's very cool.
You know, if you spend your time in the beginning, the pre-production, you make sure that the material is the best material you can get. You have the best recording engineer that you can get, and you get the greatest guys you can get. I mean, I know it sounds simple when you say just get out of the way, but I mean, it's almost like that, you know. You can't help but at one point gelling, finding its way, and it's so great to see something start from like nowhere, and then there's always someone in the room just at a point when you're not sure exactly where it's going. There's always someone who will say, well, hey, why don't we try this? And the next thing you know, that opens everything. The next thing you know, Steve will get an idea from that, or whatever. You know, there's one person's idea that suddenly starts this whole thing going.
Do you think about the chemistry of the players that you assemble, the team that you're assembling before you put a record together, and what the chemistry would be with the artist?
Yeah, I think it's important. Producing records is a lot like a director in a film. It's like, you know, you cast if you got the right script, you cast the right players for the parts, and that's, you know, an important part of it.
I think we should talk to Jacob a little bit more about the future as well, because this technique, it's funny that the subtitle of this panel is Recording in the Modern Age, because the truth is that this is like a very old-style art. This is a lost craft, really. I don't know about the next generation of record makers who think in these terms. Maybe some do, but because the technology has really changed and so many people are able to work on their own. You know, Jacob, you're somebody who, for the most part, most of your output has been totally solitary. You make the work totally alone. What do you think about when you walk into a room like this and you see a record being made in this way?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's utterly inspiring. I mean, you know, you see these musicians at the very top of the world, just communicating with each other, and it's really thrilling just to see that happen. You know, the world that I've created for myself at home, I've got, you know, this room in my house under my bedroom, which is it's just filled with instruments, and I've got a couple of microphones, a sound card, a computer. I've got Logic. I've got a really understanding and forgiving family, and lots of good food in the house, and so it's just cool. I mean, it's my world, and I've kind of always had this space ever since I was very little. I used to go in this room and just, you know, record things, experiment with harmony, sing chords, find out why they didn't sound good, why they did sound good, make grooves, understand just through trial and error why grooves worked and why they didn't work, and obviously, you know, the more you listen to, the more you learn. And so, you know, this experience of seeing it happen in this way, it's so interesting because, you know, there are some moments where I sort of, my mind just sort of immediately would jump to change something or move something around because I'm so used to being in the driver's seat with recording. You know, I've got the microphone here, the computer screen here, and the mouse here, and a bunch of instruments above my head and around me. And once that's assembled, it's such a fast process just for me because, you know, I get an idea and 10 seconds later it's recorded and it's in a position, and I've got a fluency with the software just through having used it a lot, which means I can basically generate sounds. If something comes into my imagination, I can normally find a way to do it, even if it's kind of unorthodox, which I kind of enjoy. I think it's, you know, it's different from seeing this kind of situation happen because it's to do with trusting the musicians around you. I mean, I suppose, you know, Tommy would be a master of this kind of this philosophy of, you know, understanding what it means to get a bunch of musicians in a room and let that magic happen. You know, he was talking about magic, but, you know, you can't impose magic upon people or anything in life, really. You have to kind of let it get you. And so I guess the master producer is a patient man or lady. And so it's important just to be aware of the fact that time needs to pass for things to form. But, you know, as far as my process is concerned, the recording is basically that is as much the conception as anything else, and also the arrangement. So, you know, I'll sit down in the chair, begin to record. Something will come into my mind, you know, just through having listened to so much music and tried to and thought about it. I suppose, you know, the more you do that, the more things there are in your kind of peripheral vision that you can draw from in this situation. But, you know, I've got this setup, which means that I'm sort of running around the room all the time, and I stand up and listen to it from back there, and I open the door and stand in the hallway and listen to it, and I get other people in the room because there's this crazy thing which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, where if you listen to music with somebody else in the room, then you kind of hear it through their ears, which is super cool, because if you get really bored of listening to music, like say one track has just been overplayed, and then, you know, you get someone in the room who's never heard the track before, and they get really stoked about it, then you're excited as well. And I use this all the time. So if I've, you know, when I'm in the process of production, as I'm sure these guys would agree, you know, it's very easy to just lose perspective because you go so deep into, even if it's just one sound, you know, I might loop, you know, half a second of a clip and just loop it again and again and again and try and figure out what's going on. And 4 hours later, you know, you go and have some supper or something and come back and you think that sounds weird. You know, I can't believe that's what I came up with after all that work. And it's handy to have people you can trust to just come in and join you in the space and just kind of, even if they just say, I mean, most people will say, hey, that sounds great. But you can kind of get their energy comes through. You know, if you sit and listen to it with them, you know, you sort of think, oh, they dig certain bits and other bits they don't really react. And some areas, you know, you can feel their energy releases and all this kind of stuff. And you know, I think that's kind of what it means to be a producer, really, is to be able to listen to how the energy changes over the course of something, and you can really feel that with somebody else in the room. But you know, I've gotten used to this solitary way of working, which I absolutely adore. It's my own space, and I go into my own world with it, and it's just the best feeling when it's like kind of riding a rocket or something, because you know the ideas are coming in, and then you just record the ideas and you change them around, and I never want to stop, you know. But it's finding that point where the magic happens, as Tommy was saying, you know, and that can happen with musicians of this caliber. It's super easy in some ways, you know. You kind of there's a point where everything just becomes into focus, and when you're on your own, it can be harder to kind of chase your own creative energy. It's so elusive, your creative energy. But you know, if you can find a way to get it, and then you're in the driver's seat while that happens, it's like there's no feeling better than that. That's like the best thing in the world, I suppose.
You know, the difference between like the way we've made records, you know, like the term groove was, and Steve and Dean and Al, we had a friend who unfortunately just passed away a few months ago, Joe Sample, who was one of the great groove masters of our day, man. I mean, nobody could set a groove like this guy. And it was all about the groove, you know. And you say, well, what is the groove? Well, you know, the groove is where he figures out something that feels right for him to play rhythmically, and then it's what everyone around him starts figuring out what's going to work with this groove. And in Joe's case, as you guys can attest, you know, he was very particular. He was very tough on guitar players and drummers, man. He was terrible, man. I mean, there were times, I'll never forget, we had a wonderful guitar player come into this thing, and I knew immediately it wasn't going to work because Joe's sitting there and he's trying to figure out what he's going to come up with, and this guy started playing licks, you know, and so Joe said to me, he said, "Hey, Russell, hey, wait a minute, man, I'm doing something here." And so Russell said, "Okay." And then a few minutes went by and he forgot, and he starts, you know, grooving around. And Joe, at one point, he goes, "Man, you're fucking with my groove." And it was, you remember? Yeah. You were at that date, man.
I do remember, yeah.
I had to tell the cat, you know, I said, "Hey, Russell, this is great, man, thank you. I'll see you later, man." We had to send him home, man. And then we came out to L.A. and we got Dean, because Dean has worked with Joe for ages, and he just knows what to do. You know, he knows what to do. And the funny thing about Joe is, like, if you did the right thing, if you came in playing the right groove, if you knew what to add to what he was doing, he would never say a word, you know? He would never say a word. It was just if something didn't happen right, man. And I remember when Russell walked in, this guitar player we're talking about, and I was trying to ease the blow on him, right? And Steve said to me, he says, "Well, better you than me, man."
We have about 10 minutes left. Maybe we could open it up to some questions.
Let's say, for example, like Tony Williams would say, he'd go in for a session and they'd say, "I need you to take your front head off the bass drum," and he'd say, "No." He said, I spent all these years learning how to play. I spent all these years learning how to tune. I spent all these years making music. You get my sound.
You know, I don't argue with that, man. I mean, it's like
with Tony Williams, certainly.
Well, Tony Williams, Steve Gadd. I mean, like, you know, Steve knows what his drum. Who knows better than the person who's playing the instrument what his instrument should sound like, you know?
But I mean, Steve's always had a wonderful sound and created many sounds. But I'm saying, you know, whether it be a guitar part, a keyboard part, would you tell Larry, for example, use the Rhodes on this, use the Hammond on this? Could
be. It depends on the circumstances. Right. In the case of something we did yesterday that we've been sort of like not having a sense exactly what to do, crazy. Larry came up to me and says, "You know, I think I'm going to play organ on this. I think it makes sense for me to play organ because I could play these sustained things and whatnot." And it, you know, it made sense to me. And I said, "Yeah, great. right ahead. In Dean's case, man, Dean usually by the time we start, he's got a part figured out.
So most of the people you work with, they have their sound in relation to the artist you're working for. You guys would know, and you trust your guy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I sometimes I'll ask Tommy what he thinks, if he thinks it sounds, if what I'm doing sounds good, or if the drums, you know what I mean? It's
right.
Like we bounce it off each other. I'll ask Al. I changed snare drums yesterday and tuned it way down and.
You mean the one that we put on top of the drum?
Well, no, I mean one of them on that funky thing,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, he knew exactly. He said, "That's, you know, some stuff you learned from Dr. John," which was that was the kind of sound we were going for. I mean, it could have been though. I tried that, and Tommy could have said, "You know what? I don't think it's working." I mean, but that's the kind of. We're all looking for like the agreement. It's not about trying to, you know, to make my sound. It's got to be my sound. I mean, I'm trying to find a sound that works for what we're all trying to do, and that's the attitude that makes, you know, working with these guys so much fun.
Plus, Tommy, you know, calls a certain core of, there's a certain core of musicians that he tends to call, because he knows what he's going to get, and he knows he's going to be good, and he knows those people are going to be able to be flexible, and so that mystery is gone. You know, so you know, there's a trust that's already there. You know,
it's the type of thing where you feel comfortable enough to try something. But you're with guys that you trust enough to know that if they say, you know, it's not working, you're not going to start getting insecure. Or we're all, I mean, we came here to do the same thing. We're all trying to get to the same place.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of different ways to get there, but, you know, we trust each other.
When Steve said we're all actually trying to come to an agreement, and some producers are more hands-on, or, you know, they want to generate the ideas, or at least approve every single idea. And I came to the realization pretty early in the game that, first of all, you don't want to play something that feels foolish to you if the producer has an idea that you don't like. But then you may really like the part that you just came up with, and you think it's really great, and yet the producer wants you to try something else. I came to the realization there's probably 100 good parts for this little thing. And it's just a matter of finding one that you like and the producer likes. No one has given up their ideals in order to come up with a part that everybody agrees on. It's, you can have something that you're completely proud of and completely satisfy the opposite kind of idea that you had.
Does it very often get back to the one you started with?
It could. I mean, if you're talking about early takes, everybody usually tries to record from take one, even though no one knows it, and you know it's not going to be the take. At least that's a very important part.
Yep.
Press record whether it's ready or not, because as just you know, the first takes is where everybody's making the arrangement. It's a community arrangement. And sometimes there was a part that was really good and no one remembers it until after take 5, and they were thinking, I think we've drifted off. Let's hear what we started with. And you can then take the best of the spontaneous and the best of the refined and make something really great out of it.
But trust is really important, you know. I mean, because I've been asked by either an artist or a producer to play something that goes totally against what my instincts were, and that's tough. But you're asked to do it, you do it, and I can think of a couple cases where they were right. You know, it's like, wow. And I would not have chosen that concept. I would not have. You know, I remember one session where somebody just wanted me to pull out all the stops from the get-go of this. This was a more experimental jazz record, but it was completely against my instinct, you know. And I just did it. And then we went into the booth and listened to it, and I went, "Is that me? Wow." And actually, somebody else, that's an example where somebody else kind of brought something out of me that I didn't know I had. You know, it was very strange. And then there's been the opposite, where I was told to do something that went totally against my instinct, and I really was hoping that it wouldn't end up on the record, you know. Just to me, it wasn't right, but they had a concept. And maybe later on, when you heard the mix, you heard that they really did have a kind of a more long-term concept where they were going to bring it in and out. They were going to use it. They were going to put an effect on it. They did something smart with it. And then again, you go, wow, that's not something that I would normally do, but I like it, you know. So sometimes you just have to trust, but sometimes you have to take a portion of what they're suggesting and put your own personality on it, and that's the answer, you know.
How many people are familiar with John Mayer? The Continuum album, that's him.
Yeah, I was singing every track. Took all the guitar.
All right, let's do one more question before we wrap up. Taking the first one I saw in the back. The question is, are you thinking about the genre or the style of music that you're making while you're making the record? Is that...
I think now is a time more than ever where genres are just kind of losing their relevance in some ways, just because everything's colliding. Record labels arguably have had their time, and they're the ones that sort of put things in nice vertical places, like, oh, this is this, and this kind of stuff. And I think it's some of the most exciting music that's happening now, arguably throughout the whole of history, but it's when two things come together, or maybe way more than two. This is obviously the generation, my generation is overstimulated massively. But if you embrace that, it's cool, man. Like there's so much stuff there, and there's never a reason to set out on a thing with like, I'm going to make this one record. It's in this style. It's got this many tracks. In some ways, like the fewer decisions you can make at the beginning, the more options you have in the end. Just because you're closing every time you make a decision at the beginning before you've even made a start, you're closing a door. You know. So I personally would advocate not putting a genre on the thing, even when it's finished. You don't even need to do that, but. It's cool to think about genres when you're kind of researching sounds for the record, you know, and often you'll find the most engaging sounds are the ones that you would never have expected would work. You know, something in some crazy kind of African thing that no one's ever really heard of will somehow find relevance in a jazz thing, and you would never have set out, you know, if you'd said, you know, I'm not going to do anything African, and this is a jazz record, you know, then you would have lost the opportunity for that. You got to keep your ears open. I think with genre-wise, really, yeah.
But I got called to play on a Solomon Burke record, for instance. I mean, okay, the genre is pretty clear-cut. You know, I know what we're getting into. I'm either going to play organ, Wurlitzer, you know, and I kind of have an idea of what the kind of songs are, because the arc of his career has been, you know, there's a certain thing that he does, and but ultimately it comes down. More than genre, it just comes down to the individuals and you know, and what choices these very talented individuals are making, and that goes beyond genre. You know, that's you know, you hear a couple notes of Gadd, you kind of know it's Gadd. You heard Hugh McCracken on a record, or Eric Gale, or you know, Bernard Purdie, or Richard T. On the Rhodes, for instance, man, that is a personality, you know. It kind of goes beyond genre.
Well, thanks to Jacob, Steve, Al, Larry, Dean, and, of course, Tommy LiPuma for sharing their time with us today.